Hi, I'm PC Peri, and welcome back to part 2 of the 20th Busiversary. It's Flying Focus Video Collective's annual look back at our weekly show here on Portland Community Media.
And we're people who are interested in peace and social justice issues who picked up camcorders back in 1991, some of us. And we started using video as a tool for social change, and we've been voicing the voiceless. The Video Bus features speakers, protests, and other information you can't see most anywhere else.
So grab a pen, get some paper, and write down the information that comes up on your screen.
That's right. Our phone numbers are 503-321-5051 and 503-239-7456.
The email is ffbc@flyingfocus.org.
And now join us again as producers introduce clips from the shows they produced between November 2010 and October 2011.
PC Peri back with Mike Brown, and he's going to tell us now what other shows. Conyers?
Yeah, the Conyers show was about a single representative, single payer health care, and it was a very interesting show. The thing I found the most interesting about it was he was talking about some of his past, the histories about where, how basically civil rights movements were a lot tougher sledding back in the day. So it was a very, very interesting show, and it's hosted by a very wonderful man. So very nice to hear his thoughts on that situation.
When we were doing healthcare reform, we were bombarded. The Capitol Hill police were overwhelmed. There were tens of thousands of people storming around with signs. Remember that health care is unconstitutional, that it's socialism, that it's big government, and people were screaming and cursing and threatening members of Congress quite openly. And after we passed the bill, I began to realize that there were benefits in the bill that could be helping more than half of the people that were screaming at me. The civil rights movement is the best example. We're not risking our lives by supporting universal health care, or we're not endangering our families, or we're not going to incur the wrath of the police or the prosecutors or the court system. I come out of the movement that King inspired and moved me to. I mean, King was the greatest influence in my life, politically. We had to turn the lights off in this church. We were having a meeting, and get down under, on the floor, underneath the seats in the church, because we thought that these cars circling this church that knew of the meeting might just shoot into the church. I mean, that was their life. I was just there for that meeting. This is what they were living.
And you worked on, what was the other one, Flowers?
Yeah, Dr. Margaret Flowers. That was a very interesting show because we basically used a lot of slides in that show.
Right.
Because it was a big slideshow that was her whole basis of her big talk was a slideshow. And so we decided to intercut all the slides into the show so people would understand it a lot better. And it surprisingly worked out really well.
So this all took place in January of 2011. Was it at the same place, same time?
Yeah, it was actually at the same meeting for single payer health care.
Okay.
It was a wonderful opportunity to be able to do those at the same time.
These people are developing health insurance products. It's a product. They're marketing those products. Then we have to have all the people that decide what are different products, which one do you want to buy. Then you buy it. Then you need care. You got to figure out where can you get your care. Then you get your care. Who pays what proportion? This is an incredibly wasteful way to finance or administer health care. No other nation does it this way. What do we get for the $938 billion that we're going to spend over the next 10 years for health care? It's based on an expansion of Medicaid, and then mandating that people purchase private insurance if they don't qualify for public programs, and then using tax dollars to subsidize the purchase of that private insurance, so that's tax dollars going to the insurance companies. And then in exchange for that, the private insurers said that they would accept regulation, right? But they've done so well when we tried to regulate them in the past. If we look at, what's considered affordable, a $7,000 premium with a $2,000 copay, deductible, and then co-insurance, this is $10,000 out of pocket that you're paying just right off the bat. Those three things. And fortunately, it falls into the initials ICU, which in the medical world stands for intensive care unit. So we're in a crisis, we need ICU. We, as a movement, must be independent of political parties. We cannot be allied to a political party, because when you do that, you subordinate their agenda to your agenda. So we have to be clear about what we want. And this is where education comes in. Education is so important, because words get used in different ways. This reform was called universal. It's not universal. It's called guaranteed and affordable, but it's none of those things. So we have to be clear on what those things mean and uncompromising. We can no longer settle for reforms that we know don't work. We've got to push hard for what the real reform is.
We're back with Barb now, and she's going to tell us about cell phones that the filmmaker Talal Jabari spoke about.
Right. This is another program about health, and he had a lot of information that I certainly didn't know about cell phones.
Right.
And in this clip, he talks about the effects on DNA, which is really interesting. I don't think many people are aware of this.
Please listen carefully.
In the non-ionizing radiation, you have television and radio, you have microwave ovens, and you have the cellular technologies, essentially. And these were thought for a long time. The non-ionizing radiation was thought for a long time not to cause any damage. But more and more studies are showing that it is causing DNA breaks, both single-strand and double-strand DNA breaks, and there have been studies to show this. Single-strand DNA breaks are happening to us, constantly. Every exposure to to the sun, to smoke from a passing car, to someone's secondhand smoke, there are a lot of factors that affect our DNA, and that's normal. And we can rebuild these single-strand breaks, quite easily. Double-strand breaks aren't repaired as easily and as cleanly. And I often compare it to a zipper that's sort of, that's sewn together in a way that the teeth aren't really fitting together the way they should be. And that's really a mutation of the cell. And when you're talking about a number of these forming together, you start to talk about tumors. And another thing that's important in the repairing of the DNA is our nighttime sleep. And during the sleep, when we produce melatonin, and our bodies are laying there still, we're repairing this DNA. A lot of people have cell phones or Wi-Fi running in the house. They have cell phones near their beds. There are cordless phones in their rooms, and you're still being exposed to the same sort of radiation.
So I was sitting on the MAX train the other day, going home in rush hour, and realizing I was completely surrounded by people, every one of whom was either talking or texting or doing something on a cell phone. The next one,
we're still in the health mode.
Right.
And
right.
We were talking about oil spill.
This is a journalist who's done a lot of work on oil companies, and this is an update on the oil spill in the Gulf.
Oh, that's right. She had done a lot of research on this.
Yeah, and devastating effects on not just the environment, but people's health also.
Right.
The industry is desperate for oil, and they've used up I'm loath to use the word easy stuff, but the easier stuff. And deep water is a place where there is a lot of oil. And they are going after it because we're letting them go after it. and they're racing each other for it, but it doesn't mean they know how to do it. And they don't, in fact. And we don't have a federal government that has the ability to say no. A story that kept coming to my mind was, I cover in The Tyranny of Oil, the Enron story. And the Enron energy traders say, they're caught on tape saying, when they were manipulating the price of electricity, we were kids in a playground and there was no supervision. We knew what we were doing was illegal, we knew it was immoral, but nobody was watching, so we did it anyway. And that is, to me, exactly what it feels like is happening with this drilling. They know they can't do it. They know there are huge ramifications for failure, but nobody is supervising them, and they're supposed to be going to make money, and that's what they need to go do. And that's what they're doing. And it's for us to say, yes, we need oil. I am the first one who will say, we cannot just say tomorrow, no more oil. But while we are dependent on these companies for this resource, we have to be the parents. And we have to say there's places you can't go. There's things you can't do. If you have to fight a war for it, if you have to kill someone for it, if you have to go somewhere where the consequences of failure are so extreme, you just can't do it. And we'll figure out how to deal with the consequences, which is that we have to make other policy changes. And that's, we need to be the adults. And that's your takeaway message from the book.
We're going to be looking at a clip from the Western State Center conference.
Right, they did a conference recently about organizing on the left, talking about how the left needs to get organized to really fight back against the political right.
And tighten up their political message.
Yeah, and it was kind of surprising how much of the message, because of what the right is doing about immigration and other issues, how much of it has to do with race. Which kind of goes back to issues we talked about in part one with the other clips that we showed from other shows, but it's a very important issue these days.
Once upon a time here in Portland, there was this really nasty Nazi movement. There was a tremendous amount of violence here, and a group organized itself, the Coalition for Human Dignity, in order to try to do something about it. And that group hoped to be able to attract a real base in those communities that were most targeted. And when we went about organizing, what we found was people were concerned about other things. They were certainly afraid of the violence, but we recognized that it was going to be the responsibility not of those most targeted, but of the community from which they were being drawn to do something about that rising level of violence in order to create the political and social space for people to go about addressing the issues that mattered the most to them. So if African Americans were being targeted, or Jews were being targeted, or Latinos were being targeted, or GLBT people were being targeted, what we were doing was organizing people who are not in those targeted communities, but the people from which those neo-Nazi skinhead activists were being drawn, in order for them to organize, to create the space for people to be able to organize themselves in greater safety. So I would encourage you to try to think about doing that.
There's this position that says government should be small, it should protect the interests of elites, it should not be there to provide a social safety net and all this sort of thing. And there certainly are people who really believe that to their core. So I don't want to say that that's not part of what's happening, that there isn't a fight around that. But I think as important, and maybe larger than this question of the role of government in this moment, is really a fight over who is an American and who is government meant to serve. I don't actually believe that the majority of people who voted for reactionary candidates in the midterm elections actually don't want Social Security for themselves. That they don't want a social safety net, that they don't want good hospitals, that they don't want public schools for their children.
We're with Daniel Webb, volunteer with Flying Focus Video Collective, and you did what show this year?
This was a program about Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese human rights activist who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010.
I see.
The lecture was presented by Professor Gilley of Portland State University. Professor Gilley argues that even though we need to be very concerned about the plight of human rights activists like Liu Xiaobo. We have to be careful not to disengage from China, because China is a rapidly changing society, and we have to encourage positive change, change that is actually occurring.
Got it. Take a look.
But for me, what really matters about this award in terms of the domestic situation in China is it's a reminder to us, and I think Liu Xiaobo captures this very nicely, that even though we're very concerned about China's impact on international human rights, and even though we're very concerned about continuing human rights violations in China, Liu Xiaobo is the future of China. And he says as much in that interview with French television, right? And he says, look, personal freedoms have actually expanded in this country since '89. Information freedoms have expanded tremendously. The sorts of things you can say in China these days always just continue to blow my mind. I mean, year by year, the things that people say and get away with have expanded literally year by year. Human rights are better. The police is subject to some limits now. You have to actually go through some semblance of procedures in court trials now. You can protest within limits bad government policies, especially at the local level. And Liu Xiaobo, is aware of this. Things are changing in China, and I think what's important to sort of think about with Liu Xiaobo is, he's on the right side of history, so to speak. Liu Xiaobo's China is the China of the future, and in many ways, the reaction against him is because the party knows it as well, right? They're losing control of the ability to manage society the way they always have.
We are going to talk with Frank Mahoney. He's going to tell us how long he's been with Flying Focus Video Collective. Go, Frank.
Well, PC.
Thanks.
I think we were at a meeting.
Yes.
On Belmont. I can't remember the name of the place.
I remember that place.
But that was one of the first meetings you had of, was it Cosmine or Flying Focus, and you were just starting to come up with the name. But first off, that was from a rally. I just happened to walk into a rally at the newly built Oregon Convention Center, and there was a protest rally about George W. Bush Sr.'s politics and screw-ups. Thank you very much, sir. And I just thought it would be a great way for me to get involved in politics and help out and try to see if I can change the curve a little bit, which probably hasn't been changed too much in my recollection, but for 20 years or better, since '91, and sitting in that chair and trying to come up with the name of Flying Focus Video Collective. It's been 20 years I've been helping off and on, right?
More on than off.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Handelman, back again with PC Peri, who helped provide most of the footage for the show that I produced about protests that happened on the 8th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. I also got footage from Jim Lockhart, who was there that day, and Jim couldn't be with us tonight because he's not feeling well.
And there was the Pioneer Courthouse Square, Portland, Oregon.
That's correct. We were in Pioneer Courthouse Square. There was about 1,700 people that turned out for this. Two of the speakers you're going to hear are Ray Harris, who's president of the Oregon chapter of Iraq Veterans Against the War, and Francisco Lopez, who is the leader of CAUSA, which is a immigrant rights group in Oregon. And you can hear drums from the NOR Drum Corps in both the clips from the march. And I was one of the organizers of this event, and it happened on the same day that the U.S. started dropping bombs on Libya. So it was really frustrating being an activist and hearing this news while we're in the middle of a march for peace.
They're not coming back. Nobody who dies comes back. Lots of people are dying. And the money that the government steals from you doesn't just go to kill people in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. We fund oppressive governments all over the world. If we don't persevere, if we don't continue doing what we're doing and speaking out, gathering, peaceably assembling, our future will surely look like a boot stamping on a human face forever. End the war. Stop the bloodshed for profit. And bring my friends home. Wisconsin and Madison, where people were marching for their survival. Where were you when 500,000 of immigrants were deported last year? Where were you, Mr. President? But Mr. President, we want to make sure that you do the right thing. The first thing, bring the troops back home.
My most recent show features Nobel Peace Prize nominee Kathy Kelly, who heads up Voices for Creative Nonviolence in Chicago. Kathy and her group have made numerous trips to Afghanistan and visited with the Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. As with her work in Iraq with Voices in the Wilderness, Kathy's strength is in bringing back the big picture questions like who's benefiting from the war and the occupation, as well as personal stories about people she's met. Part of her August 2011 talk here in Portland referred to time she spent in federal prison as part of a civil disobedience action. There's been a lot of focus on the probable withdrawal of all troops from Iraq by the end of 2011 and probably about a third of the troops from Afghanistan, but bringing the information about what's really happening on the ground has never been as important as it is now. What's more, Kathy has a real powerful homespun way of encouraging everybody to take action.
The Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers have been quite brave, and they've paid a penalty, a severe one. They have, over the last 4 years, believing in Gandhian-style nonviolence, not only supported one another in their very simple living in the Bamiyan province, where they are potato farmers, and their lives are quite rough, but they've also been aware that they're supposed to hate the Taliban, and the Taliban have, in Abdullah's case, previously killed his father, forced all of these youngsters to become refugees as very little toddlers. And they spent time in refugee camps where it was very, very cold and they were hungry. And their lives had not been easy, but they don't want to continue the spirals of violence. It's too soon to die. We can change this. We can say that we no longer accept spending our wealth, our treasure, and so many human lives on a war that seems designed to protect the capacity of financial elites, large corporations, and war profiteers, including those who run protection rackets that control the roads, many of whom are getting some of the largesse of this money being spent, many of whom actually are part of the Taliban, that we no longer want to put up with it. We can remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki and realize how quickly the proliferation extended, and know that this drone technology is going to proliferate also, and give us all the more reason to say to the children knocking at our doors, and they're your grandchildren, and your future generations and your family lines, to say to all of them, yeah, we're going to shoulder our adult responsibility. We're going to become American adult peace volunteers, and you're not going to see the like of it.
That wraps it up for the 20th Busiversary. That's 20 years of Flying Focus. I'm Dan Handelman, and we thank you for joining us.
And I'm PC Peri, and hope you've enjoyed watching the show, seeing the clips, and got some information that you will use.
And also here in the studio tonight, we've got a couple of folks. We've got Moss, who's directing back in the booth. Frank is on camera. And we've got Alan, who's floor directing. We've got Alan, who's floor directing, and we've got Mark, who's running the camera.
So if you want to join us, get involved, contact us at 503-239-7456 or 321-5051.
Or you can write to us on email at ffvc@flyingfocus.org. Tune in or set your video recorder each week in the same time slot for the Flying Focus Video Bus.
Be active. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.